Star Trek Prodigy, Escape Route, Chapter 3. Jankum picked his way through a dune of shredded metal, the shavings so fine that they felt feathery and soft even through his environmental suit. It was definitely the most pleasant part of his journey so far, considering he had already trekked through a puddle of some unidentifiable sticky substance, a giant pile of ship parts, and lots of loose plastic. Jankum, though, was following a trail. He'd set the tracker on his multi-met to look for crystalline wires. The wires, if they were fused together with the Lexorian pylons, tucked away in the shuttle's emergency reserves, could serve as a replacement matrix restoration coil in a pinch, and Jankum suspected they'd be easier to find out here than a new coil. Sure enough, after a good while of Jankum simply milling around, the mitt had finally started beeping, the sound coming in through his helmet. "Almost there," Jankum muttered as he heaved himself out of the metal shavings. He dusted the dark specks off his clothes and looked down at the tracker. A little blue light on the minuscule screen pointed just up ahead. He zoomed in, frowning a little, trying to get a clearer picture of where to look. The trash moved behind him. Jankum startled and turned around, half expecting to see Murph bouncing toward him, since the others had wanted to come search with him for some reason, but there was no one there. "Huh," Jankum said, before turning back to his mitt. He crept forward, walking softly on the loose ground, bits of trash sliding under his feet. This time he saw a dark flash out of the corner of his eye. "Who's there?" Jankum jerked his head up, scanning the horizon. Nothing but trash as far as he could see. "Dal, are you joking around or something?" There was no answer. Jankum sighed and forced himself to focus on his multi-met. The tracker light blinked more earnestly as Jankum veered around a rather precariously leaning stack of old scaffolding. When he saw what was waiting for him on the other side, he let out a whoop of excitement. It was a shuttlecraft, not too dissimilar from the one he and the others had replicated aboard the Protostar, although it looked older and it was more beat up. The thing wouldn't be able to fly, given how bent its frames were, but it was in one piece, which meant there were probably supplies inside, and not just crystalline wires either. Jankum bounded up to the ship and pulled on the door. It didn't budge. "Come on," he muttered, yanking as hard as he could. This time the door flung off completely, sending Jankum crashing down on his back a few paces away. He sat up, shaking out his head. Why did he feel like someone was watching him? Jankum crawled to his feet and looked around. He wished he had a proper tricorder. That way he could scan for life signs, and when he saw the familiar signs of the crew, he could march up to them and tell them to stop fooling around. But he didn't have a tricorder, and everything was still around him, frozen in place. Maybe it had just been his imagination after all. "Jankum Pog is losing it," he laughed. He crawled into the shuttle, pushing aside long, draping power cables. Everything was jumbled up and dusty. Whatever had happened to the shuttle, it wasn't good. At least it didn't seem like there had been any passengers aboard. Jankum's mitt directed him to a supply cabinet. He banged on the panel until it popped open, revealing an ancient medical kit, some crumbling food rations, and a big spool of crystalline wires. "Gotcha!" Jankum grabbed the wires just as he felt something slam into his back. Jankum shouted in surprise and stumbled backward, whirling around in time to see Gwyn standing just inside the shuttlecraft, a tricorder in one hand, and a pile of dislodged cables floating around her. So that was what had smacked him. She grinned sheepishly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you." She lifted her tricorder. "I was following your life signs. I didn't expect the ceiling to collapse on top of me, though." "So you were following Jankum?" He scuttled forward, ducking out of the shuttlecraft. The rest of the crew was waiting for him and Gwyn next to the pile of scaffolding. "I wouldn't say we were following you," Dal said. "You're already in the shuttlecraft by the time we got here." Jankum frowned. Jankum thought he saw you rustling around in the trash. The others glanced at one another, confusion clear on their faces. No, Gwyn said. We didn't see you until you were in the shuttle. Listen, we figured out what this place is. Well, Jankum has good news, too. He held up the spool of crystalline wires. Once Jankum fuses these babies with the Lexorian pylons, we'll be warping our way to Earth. Oh, thank goodness, Rock Talk said. Hopefully we can get out of here now and avoid another one of those explosions. Explosions? Shouted Jankum. What happened to you? That's what I'm trying to say, Gwyn said. We aren't on a moon. We're on a giant ball of trash. It feels purposeful to me, Zero added. My theory is that the life forms we scanned are pulling in passing detritus somehow. If this place has been around long enough... You get a trash ball, Dal said with a grin. Jankum laughed. That's pretty awesome. It's not that awesome, Rock Talk said. Anything that passes by gets pulled into orbit, like fuel tanks from ships or transporter coils, and when the wrong things mix together, they blow up. We saw it happen, Dal added, just now. Jankum chuckled. Jankum should have gone with you. He tossed a spool of wires into the air and caught it. Maybe once Jankum repairs the ship, we can hang around in orbit until we see another explosion. Gwyn and Rock Talk looked at each other and rolled their eyes. I don't know, Dal said. That would be cool. I can't disagree, Zero added. Murph stuck his head out of a pile of plastic and squeaked into his comm badge. Well, I'd prefer not to get stuck in an explosion, Gwyn said. So maybe we should think about... She froze mid-sentence and whipped her head around. Did you see that? Jankum felt a surge of exhilaration. You saw something too? He shouted. Gwyn held up one finger, quieting him. Jankum lowered his voice. Something was watching Jankum, he whispered. I thought it was you. Jankum was interrupted by a hunk of round, smooth metal rolling across a pile of old ship parts, bouncing haphazardly until it came to a stop, a few paces away from the crew. Why did that move? Dal asked, flicking his gaze around. Don't tell me there's going to be another explosion. We should get out of here, Gwyn said, and the others all murmured their agreement. But as the crew began to make their way back toward the shuttle, Jankum hung back, frowning at the ball of metal. He lifted his gaze, following the path it had taken over the scrap pile. Jankum, Gwyn hissed. We need to get the shuttle. Someone's here, Jankum said, creeping forward. He was sure of it. He'd felt eyes on him the entire time he'd been tracking the crystalline wires, and he felt eyes right now. Someone was watching them. We scanned for life signs, Gwyn said with a sigh. No one was nearby. Here, I'll scan again. But before she could pull out her tricorder, the trash spilled, crashing along the same path as the metal ball. Jankum and Gwyn both dived out of the way, their shouts attracting the attention of the others, who raced back in their direction. Every single one of them was certain that there'd be another explosion. But there was no shudder through the ground, no avalanche of trash. Actually, the trash had stopped moving, piling up a few meters away from where Jankum was now scanning the area with the tricorder, which he'd grabbed off Gwyn in the confusion. Are you picking up life signs? Dal asked, jogging over to him. No, nothing. The tricorder beeped into Jankum's ear. There! Something's there! Jankum's eyes went wide, and he plunged forward, his gaze fixed on the output screen. The signal faded in and out. He smacked the side of the tricorder. It didn't help. Signal's not strong, though, he said. Something's wrong with the tricorder. The signal flared back, and Jankum frowned. Definitely something wrong, he said. It says Jankum Pog is standing right on top. Suddenly, Jankum was flung backward, paper and plastic fluttering up around him, along with a big sheet of silver metal which had been buried beneath. He landed hard, sinking down into the garbage. The tricorder was still beeping. Don't worry, I've got you. Rock Talk pulled Jankum up to standing. He let out a growl of disapproval and swatted away the plastic fragments clinging to his clothes. "What happened?" Jankum asked. "That was no explosion." He peered around Rock Talk, trying to get a glimpse of where he'd been standing. Everything was still. "See?" he said. "Something pushed Jankum." "It did kind of look like that," Gwen agreed. Jankum whipped the tricorder around. The signal was gone, and that was when the realization hit him. "They're underground," he whispered, then repeated it even louder. "They're underground, under the trash!" He rushed forward, clutching the tricorder. He pushed past Gwen and Dahl until he was back to where he'd been standing, the tricorder directed down at the ground. It beeped faintly. "See?" he said excitedly. Then he tossed the tricorder aside, where it was promptly caught by Zero, who saved it before it vanished into the enormous pile of waste, and began pulling aside scraps of metal and big fluffy tufts of synthetic filler. "Come out," Jankum said. "I know you've been watching me." Behind him, Gwen looked over at Dal and threw her hands up in the air. "Maybe something is there," Dal suggested. "Maybe something's there that could get us all killed," Gwen countered. "Come out and talk to Jankum!" Jankum bellowed, and that's when a small dark blur erupted out of the trash. Jankum fell backwards, scrambling uselessly over the loose trash as the blue skittered over the surface, zipping in a wild zigzag pattern so quickly that it almost seemed to fly. It darted around Dal and Gwen and headed straight to Rock Talk and Murph, who both let out shrieks of surprise, which made the thing careen off to the side. "It's scared," cried Rock Talk. "You scared it, Jankum!" And then, to everyone's shock, the small, dark blur stopped. It wasn't a blur at all, but a sleek little creature with big green eyes and small, quick hands and bristled gray fur that smoothed back as he turned toward the crew, head tilted quizzically to the side. The creature had a tiny breathing apparatus hooked over his snout, and he looked at the crew, eyes wide. Then he reached down to the little pack he wore around his waist and pulled out a small, pale ball that glowed with a pale light. "What's he doing?" whispered Dal. The creature flung the ball to the ground, and immediately an energy bubble exploded outward, passing over the crew with a warm, tingling burst. Soon they were all standing inside a small, buzzing energy dome. Gwen pulled out her tricorder. "It's an environmental field," she said. "It looks like the air would be safe to breathe." "Are you sure?" asked Rock Talk. The creature whipped off his breathing apparatus and gave an excited little squeal. "You can talk!" he squeaked. "And you speak Chakran!" "I do?" asked Rock Talk. Murph gurgled. The creature wiggled his little black nose. Then he loped up to Rock Talk on all fours before rising up on his hind legs as if to get a better look at her. "I can understand you," he said, "although not this one." He pointed at Murph, who squeaked appreciatively. The creature made a similar squeak back. Rock Talk smiled, almost overcome by the general adorableness of the exchange. "It's a universal translator," Zero said, and the creature craned its head to look at them. "You also speak Chakran!" he cried. "No." Zero floated down and peeled off their comm badge and showed it to the creature, who sniffed it uncertainly. "It smells like an energy cell," the creature said. "That could be very useful to the pod." "The pod?" asked Gwen. The creature looked over at her in shock, jumping back on his hind legs. "Do you all speak Chakran?" he whimpered. "Even the scavenger?" "Scavenger?" Gwen laughed. "Oh, you mean Jankum?" She pointed at him. Jankum scowled. "You were following me," Jankum said accusingly. "Through the trash." "Trash?" The creature tilted his head to the side, his long silvery whiskers trembling. "I don't understand that word. I understand the rest." "All of this," Zero said, spreading out the long arms of their containment suit to encompass a garbage pile stretching behind the walls of the shimmering environmental sphere. "Everything this place is made of." "Oh!" The creature made a little chirping laugh. "Brrr! You mean soil!" "Fascinating," Zero murmured. Then they laughed too. It seems our translator isn't completely foolproof. Creature shrugged. Who are you? Zero. Zero. The creature nodded. You are very strange looking for an Asheri. All of you. He turned slowly, taking in the crew. Very strange. Asheri? Dal muttered. Gwen shook her head. No matter, creature said. Asheri are very strange overall. Good for trading, that's all. And they don't speak Chakran like you. My name is Yichiri. Yichiri gave a little bow. One tiny hand pressed to his little fuzzy chest. Rocktalk had to suppress a gasp of delight. I will take you to my pod. They will be very interested in meeting all of you. Chapter 4. Yichiri led the crew across the expanse of trash until they came to the hull of a Klingon bird of prey. It leaned sideways, the bay doors yawning open, and Yichiri threw down the environmental sphere again, creating a bubble around the ship. The crew looked at one another as Yichiri slid off his breathing apparatus. None of them made a move to remove their helmets, though. Come, Yichiri said. I told you. Safe to breathe. He mimed taking off a helmet. Gwen scanned the air inside the bubble. Readings are safe, she said uncertainly. The bubble creates a mini atmosphere. Yes, safe, Yichiri said eagerly. And it will be easier to talk. He looked between the faces of the crew, his tail arched up expectantly. Where are we going exactly? Dal asked. Is this ship your, pod? No, said Yichiri. Just the entrance. Come. He scurried inside on all fours, his tail curled over his back. Gwen glanced over at Dal. What do you think? She said softly. Should we go inside? Dal hesitated, glancing back at the others. Part of him knew that he should say no. They hadn't found a matrix restoration coil, but Jankum seemed confident he could fix the engine with those crystalline wires, so there was no need for them to stay here. But he also knew he was going to walk into that bird of prey, however it got here, and follow Yichiri down to Yichiri's pod. Because Dal didn't want to pack up in the shuttle and fly to Earth, nothing was waiting for him there except punishment. He wouldn't even be able to talk his way into a position in Starfleet like the others could if they wanted. He was an augment, a genetically engineered being, and Gwen had learned that augments aren't allowed to join Starfleet. She had told him this hard truth on their last day aboard the Protostar. She knew it would break his heart, but he deserved to know the truth. Are you coming or not? Yichiri yelled from inside the ship, his voice bouncing off the walls. Let's do it, Dal said with a grin. One last adventure, come on. That's what you said about landing here, Gwen pointed out. Jankum wants to see too. Jankum bounced past the two of them and clomped onto the ship. Rocktalk followed up behind him, Murph draped around her shoulders. I like Yichiri, Rocktalk said, and maybe Starfleet will want to know about him, his people. She smiled brightly. Maybe if we tell them about this place, they won't be so mad about the Protostar. I agree, said Zero, zooming up behind her. Besides, it'll be fascinating to explore, don't you think? See? Said Dal with a grin. Come on, Gwen. Don't be a party pooper. Besides, we can keep our helmets on. Would that make you feel better? Gwen sighed, although she broke into a sly smile. I suppose it can't hurt. With that decision made, the remaining crew members marched through the bay doors. The interior of the ship had been completely stripped. All electronic equipment was gone, the computers, the transporters, the wiring in the walls. There wasn't even any furniture, but there was a gaping hole in the floor, which was where Yichiri stood. Where's Jankum? Dal asked. Down here! Jankum's voice drifted up from the shadow of the hole. Just climbing down! Come on, they got a whole atmosphere down here! Do not take off your helmet, Gwen shouted at him. No, you can take your helmets off, Yichiri chirped. Underground is safe to breathe. We'll see, Dal said. So these ladders, these are the way to the pod? Yichiri nodded. Wait for me at the bottom of the ladders. Dal went first, well, second, after Jankum. The ladder was thin and rickety. He suspected that it had not been a part of the original ship. In fact, it was clear that the ladder led out of the ship and down into the trash pile itself, because as Dal descended, he could see where the garbage had layered over time and compacted down, crushed by its own weight. About halfway down the ladder, he came to an energy shield that blipped out as he approached, then reappeared once he'd passed. An airlock, he realized, when the same thing happened a few moments later. Somehow the inhabitants of this place had created an artificial atmosphere inside the trash ball. The descent didn't take long. Dal was surprised, in fact, when he saw something like flat ground waiting for him at the bottom. Jankum waved his multi-mid at him as Dal stepped off the ladder, testing his weight with one foot and then the other. The ground was spongy, but solid.
"Jankum thinks it's compacted trash," Jankum said excitedly. "All chewed up and smashed back together."
"Huh," said Dal, sweeping his gaze up from the floor. They were in a narrow tunnel. Lights hung at irregular intervals from the ceiling, and they were all different types of lights and bulbs, too, casting the space in a yellowish-green color.
"Wow, look at this place,"
Zero fluttered down beside Dal.
"They seem to have burrowed into the trash itself." "And they created an artificial atmosphere," Jankum said excitedly, gesturing down at his multi-mit. "Jankum says we take off these helmets."
"Let's wait a second on that," Gwyn said. The others joined them, first Gwyn, then Murph, who bounded excitedly down the ladder, and then finally Rock Talk, who gazed up at the space in wonder, her eyes big behind her helmet. Yuchiri brought up the rear, pushing his way through the wide-eyed crew.
"This way,"
Yuchiri squeaked.
"But please, take off your helmets. Much more comfortable that way."
Dal looked over at Gwyn, who sighed a little. She knew when she'd been defeated. She watched as Dal unlatched his helmet, pulling it off, shaking his head. He took a deep breath. "See?" he said. "I'm just fine." Yuchiri chittered in excitement as Jankum and Rock Talk slid off their own helmets. Everyone looked at Gwyn. She sighed. "Fine," she said, and slowly lifted her helmet, holding her breath as she did. She inhaled experimentally. The air was a little stale, but certainly safe. She breathed deeper.
"See? Much more comfortable,"
Yuchiri said.
"Now, follow me."
Yuchiri skittered down the tunnel, loping on all fours, and the others followed. The tunnel was fairly large enough that Rock Talk could fit, even if she had to duck her head just a little. "How'd you do all of this?" Gwyn asked Yuchiri, her gaze moving over the solid-seeming walls.
"I didn't make this," Yuchiri said. "The first Chikara did, many years ago."
"Chikara," Dal said. "Is that the name of your people?"
"The first Chikara, they were stranded here. Their ship crashed. Well, not their ship. They were prisoners, forced to work for bad people."
"Oh," said Zero. "We know what that's like." Yuchiri stopped in the tunnel and turned around, his nose wiggling.
"You are also prisoners?" he cried in alarm. "Where are your captors?"
"We aren't prisoners anymore," Dal said quickly, "but we were forced to work on a mining colony. We escaped." Yuchiri clapped his hands together and chittered in excitement.
"Then you'll be welcome in the pod," he cried. "Come, come."
They followed the tunnel, the mismatched lighting changing the colors of the walls and the shape of the shadows that followed them along their path. It wasn't long before the sound of voices filled the tunnel, distant, chittering voices too far away for the universal translators to pick up. And then the group stepped into an enormous cavern filled with dozens of Chikara. They were zooming all over the place, chattering excitedly to one another, all of them with some item or another clutched in their paws or in their mouth. On the other side of the cavern, a whole team of Chikara were pulling what appeared to be a ship's engine across the floor, each pair of little hands clutching ropes lashed around the engine, which was itself balanced on 3 metal cylinders, helping it to roll across the floor. Still others were sorting through baskets of detritus, throwing items into piles, while other Chikara scurried back and forth, gathering the items in little makeshift baskets. It took only a few moments for Dal and the rest of the crew to be noticed. One of the basket-carrying Chikara came scrambling up next to them, and then did a double-take when she saw the crew standing awkwardly in the entranceway. She shrieked. "Don't worry!" Yuchiri cried. "They're friends!" "Friends?" The Chikara sniffed at the crew, her whiskers trembling. "They don't look like Ashari." "They aren't Ashari," Yuchiri said, "and they can understand Chikaran." "They keep saying that word," Dal murmured to Gwen. "Ashari." "I noticed," Gwen whispered back. "Yuchiri said something about trading with them. It might be some other group that lives here. Maybe?" By this point, the crew's presence had drawn more attention, and Chikara were stopping their work to come over to investigate. They flooded around the crew, sniffing and chattering amongst themselves. "Never seen anything like this!" cried one. "Look at those clothes!" cried another. "Such fine materials!" One of them slunk up to Jankum and began poking curiously at his multi-mitt. Jankum yelped and jumped away, clutching his mitt to his chest. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked. "That's Jankum's." "It could make a good trade," the Chikara said indignantly. "Enough food for the entire pod." "Trade?" Gwen turned to Jankum and the Chikara. "Who do you trade with?" "The Ashari," the Chikara said, as if it were obvious. "They live on a small planet on the other side of Urte. They come here for a scavenge every cycle." "Urte?" Gwen said. "Is that the big red planet?" The Chikara nodded. Yuchiri bounded up to Dal and Gwen, bouncing excitedly on his paws. You must all come with me," he said. "Karja is excited to meet you." "Karja?" Dal frowned. The leader of the pod," Yuchiri said. "Come, come." Yuchiri's announcement was met with excited chittering from the Chikara who swarmed around the crew. "That's a great honor," cried one. "You must go immediately," cried another, which was how the crew found themselves propelled deeper into the cavernous room. Yuchiri led the way, marching on his hind legs, his tail arched out behind him. Dal pushed his way forward and fell into step alongside Yuchiri, although he had to walk quickly to keep up. The Chikara could really move when they wanted to. "How did Karja find out about us?" Dal said, flicking his gaze over to the crowd of Chikara, which seemed to be growing larger by the second. "Word spreads quickly in the pod," Yuchiri said, "and on the station. We've been watching you since your shuttle landed." Yuchiri surged forward, leaving Dal to fall into step alongside Rock Talk, who was gazing around the cavern in wonder. Murph mewled softly on her shoulder as he did the same. "Look at this place," Rock Talk said. It was impressive. Even Dal had to admit that. Aside from the fact that it had apparently been carved out of compacted trash, the Chikara had managed to build an entire city of structures from scrap metal and sheet plastic and other tossed-aside materials. Nothing matched. It looked rather like a patchwork quilt, all different colors and textures stitched together, but it seemed stable. Plenty of excited furry faces peered out the windows of the buildings they marched past, gazing at the crew with curiosity. The path turned sharply, revealing the biggest, most impressive building yet. Dal stumbled to a stop, staring up at it, open-mouthed. Beside him, Rock Talk let out a long, sharp, "Ooh!" her eyes as big as saucers. Even Gwen seemed impressed. "It's a palace," Zero said. It did look like a palace. The structure was made of some kind of twisting, filigreed metal, with walls assembled from glass of all different shapes and quality and thicknesses. "How did you build that?" Jankum burst out. Yuchiri chittered. "The pod core is built out of every precious item we find in the ground," he said proudly. "We add on to it whenever we have something worthy." The pod core glittered in the lights shining over the pod itself, as well as from a few rays of the pink light of the surface which spilled in through holes that had been drilled into the ceiling of the cavern. "This way!" Yuchiri cried. He marched up to the pod core, which was even shinier and stranger and more jumbled together up close. The doors, which appeared to have been lifted off a Vulcan ship, swung open as they approached. When Dal crossed over the threshold, he lifted his eyes in wonderment at the structure, trying to take in the many treasures fused and twisted together to create something new. Kind of like our crew, he thought, although it made him sad, so he pushed it away. Gather round, Ichiri said, loping on all fours, until all the members of the crew were crowded in tight around one another. What is going on here? Gwen murmured softly. Dal nudged her. Just enjoy yourself, he said. Better than what's waiting for us on Earth. Are we sure about that? Gwen's eyes narrowed with suspicion, and she looked around the interior of the pod core. You worry too much, Dal said, although his words were drowned out by a fanfare of music. On the opposite end of the room, a Chikara strummed out a chord on an instrument that, like everything else in the pod, appeared to have been fashioned out of trash. Shh! Ichiri hissed at Dal and Gwen. She's coming! Across the room, a stone door slid open, wobbly on mismatched wheels, and a new Chikara stepped into the room. She walked on her hind legs, and unlike every other Chikara the crew had seen, she wore an elaborate headdress made of plastic and bits of dangling, multicolored foil that caught the refracted pink light spilling in through the glass ceiling. So what do we have here? She asked. Dal could feel the others looking over at him expectantly, as if they were still on the protostar and he was still the captain. He in turn looked at Ichiri, who skittered up to Amkarja and gave a little bow. These are the strangers, he said. They are not Ashari. I see that. Amkarja eyed the crew, her eyes narrowed. Who's the leader? Oh, that's Dal, said Rocktalk cheerfully. The others nodded. Dal sighed. They do speak Chikaran, Amkarja cried excitedly, clapping her little hands together. Which one of you is Dal? Dal could feel everyone staring at him as he slowly raised his hand. Amkarja strutted up to him and sniffed, her long whiskers wiggling. You're the leader? She said. Not exactly, Dal said. I don't understand. Amkarja stepped back, studying him. Dal took a deep breath. We used to have a ship, he finally said. Amkarja gave a slight nod. And you're no longer captain? Why did it feel like he was being interrogated? And even worse, he could feel the crew staring at him, waiting to hear his answer. We don't have the ship anymore, he finally said. Just our shuttle. It's a long story. A long story, Amkarja repeated flatly. But before Dal could respond, her mouth split into a smile and her eyes brightened. Perfect for telling over dinner, then. Dinner? Dal said. Yes, with you as the guests of honor. Amkarja pushed past Dal to get a better look at the others, her head tilting back to look at Rocktalk and Murph. When Zero flittered over to them, she let out a little gasp. Look at that, she cried. What a marvelous construction! Do you mean my containment suit? Zero asked. Yes, lovely! The light in Zero's chest plate fluttered happily. Thank you, they said. I built it myself out of spare parts. Spare parts? Amkarja repeated the phrase, puzzlement in her voice. I'm not sure I understand. Soil, Gwen offered, remembering the Chikaran word for trash, and Amkarja's eyes widened in understanding. Amazing, she cried to Zero. What's your name? Zero told her. Well, you're an honorary Chikara, she said, building your suit out of soil, just like we do. Oh, said Zero, thank you. That's a great honor. Amkarja nodded with satisfaction. And the rest of you are honored guests, she said with a smile. So you will join us for dinner. And then, with a grand flourish, she swept around, marching back toward the door. No one moved. No one knew what to do, in fact, until Ichiri hissed, Follow her!